I am Mike Gogo. I'm almost sure of that. And this is my friend Jack Woodward, who I've known for approximately 50 years. I met him years ago, and when he was welding, and I was with my father, I was getting something done. And when I was a young fellow, just actually, I was only 10 years old, there was this big scandal about the chief of police in Vancouver, Walter Mulligan. And this was in the late 40s, around 1940, 1950. And I was talking one time. I remember back when I was 15, and I had heard that Jack was a policeman before he became a welder, and so I just reminded him of that about 6 weeks ago when he came up to get some lumber because he does hobby work, and he told me that he wasn't a good policeman, and I asked him why he would say that because he's good at everything else, and he said, well, it was pretty hard because working under Mulligan they were so crooked, and certain things happened to him that he lost faith in the department and he handed his badge and he walked out on the thing. Now, I'll give you a little bit of history that, like I say, the Walter Mulligan thing. Back here, there's a book I just finished reading on it. Apparently, he came along in the late 40s and promised to, as he would call, sweep clean the Vancouver police of any criminal activity. He was a very good speaker, big 6'2" Irishman, and he made the social rounds. He'd go to different service clubs and tell them what they wanted to hear, and then it got very, very corrupt. I'm not saying it wasn't corrupt before he got there, but it got even more corrupt. And the gambling and the prostitution, all the rest of it, the payoffs, it was just ridiculous. And nobody wanted to seem to know it. In Canada, we I think sometimes we have a little arrogance that those things don't happen here. Well, they certainly do. And if you read the book, and it's called Top Cop Gone Bad, it really reveals all this stuff. And they had one of these inquiries, and but with Tupper, who was, I believe, a dignitary, a law professor at the University of Vancouver, and he did a fair job of investigating this whole thing in the commission, and certainly found more than enough evidence to proceed with it. But the Attorney General of BC said it wasn't enough. And but what really happened, according to all the people involved, including some good honest detectives, is that it was, they're so corrupt because where there's money and when there's influence, they hire their relatives, and the nepotism, it goes a long way in crime like it does in any other commercial venture. So a few things to note about things that happened over there is when the bad stuff hit the fan over there, there was a Detective Sergeant Len Cuthbert, and he was in charge of the gambling squad. And apparently Mulligan had made him this dignitary because he was easily persuaded. Quite a nice man, but easily bullied and intimidated. And when it hit the fan, he attempted to commit suicide, did Sergeant Len Cuthbert, and he actually shot a .38 pistol right through his chest, but he lived, and he lived to testify, and he did a lot of testifying. And another policeman, Superintendent Harry Whelan, was described as a clean, honest cop, and he had suffered from depression for some time because his daughter had committed suicide, and his brother was another detective, and Jack, his brother Jack, and he wasn't quite as honest, so they say, as Harry was. And I think that Harry thought that if this investigation got wheels under it, then his brother would end up going to jail for a long time, and they'd be asking him all kinds of questions about his daughter that committed suicide. And so he committed suicide, and he was successful at it. And it was a shame because apparently he was a very nice man. And apparently in this inquiry, the Tupper inquiry, there was a detective named Bob Leatherdale. And he was a veteran detective and well known and well respected. And he gave a tremendous amount of testimony and evidence that there was a large number of police on the take there. In fact, the Attorney General at the time, Attorney General Wismer, asked RCMP in Ottawa to investigate and to try to turn over to them. And they gave what was called in the book a very strange answer. They said no, they wouldn't entertain that because if they did that, then everybody would want it done. Which means to me that the RCMP, as different from city police, must have known there was that corruption was rampant, and they weren't about to investigate all these different police departments across Canada. In fact, if you look it up, about 10 years ago, there was a police department in Ontario with approximately 50 officers, and the federal agency moved in and took the whole place over. It was completely and utterly corrupt. But anyhow, what they did do is, with the RCMP advised them to hire this ex-RCMP inspector, T.G. Parslow, and he came out with a report stating that the police department in Vancouver, the heads are clean and can be trusted implicitly. He was well paid for this commission, including a $500 payment from the Mayor Thompson's personal account. Records show. So whether that was an honorarium or a bribe, we'll leave to the whatever. Another was a gentleman involved here was Judge Gordon Scott, and he was sort of in charge of this thing, but he decided that a trip to Britain was more in order, and he took off for a year. There was one of the reasons why this whole thing came to light was there was a newspaper, and it was sort of a scandal paper called Flash. And they broke the story, and they kept the story going, and they had evidence, and they had documents, and the Vancouver Sun and the province wouldn't touch it at all until long after the fact. And apparently one of the main witnesses was Helen Douglas, who was a mistress of our friend Mulligan, and she testified about all the money he gave her, and then in fact he had bought her a house. But after all this investigation, nothing was ever done about it. There was just an inquiry, and the Attorney General said that there just wasn't enough evidence to proceed, although Tupper thought there was more than enough evidence. And in the meantime, Mulligan and his wife, who never did have any children, they just took off or moved to Los Angeles, where he worked as a bus dispatcher. I guess he's still in uniform, and later in a nursery. And after many years realizing there was no charges outstanding or would be, because it was just a string that would unravel to where it would end, nobody knows, and a lot of people didn't want anybody to know. In any event, they returned to Vancouver Island, and they retired in Oak Bay. That was in 1963. They retired in Oak Bay, and he passed away in 1987 in Oak Bay. And yes, one other thing, there was a reporter named Ray Monroe, and he was very prominent. He was just, a lot of people call him a sensationalist, but he was the other person that kept trying to prove that Mulligan was on the take, and a lot of people in the department were on the take, and a lot of people call him a sensationalist. But what he did one day is he took another reporter, and at the time there was a case where a man and a woman would be going to Stanley Park, and they'd be making out in a car, and these thugs would come along and apparently hit the guy over the head and rape the woman. And no one seemed to be able to solve this. So this Ray Monroe and his friend, another reporter, one put on a wig, and they were parked in the car, and all of a sudden these people come along and they attempted to mug them. Well, this Monroe had a gun. So he took up the gun and chased these guys and shot at one of them. And a weird thing happened that if I hadn't seen this myself in a similar experience, I wouldn't believe it happened. He missed the guy, but he hit a branch. The branch come down, hit the guy in the head, knocked him out. Now, I would say that's impossible, except I've seen one day a little lady take a shot at a target way down there, and with a .22, his big branch snapped off, and I guess it was just his time and it happened. Anyhow, they got the one guy, and he actually had the license numbers of all these different people that they had assaulted and raped. So they caught them just like that. Well, it was very embarrassing for the police, and of course Mulligan was out to make all the trouble he could for this Ray Monroe, but he was not to be deterred. Anyhow, I didn't realize until about 2 months ago that my good friend Jack here was actually on the force, and the reason he told me that he wasn't a good policeman is he couldn't put up with their corruption. And I was really interested to know, because I don't think there's too many people that can sit here today and say that they lived through that era. And I'm asking Jack if he'd be so kind, and he is, to come here tonight and just tell me about a couple of experiences he told me, why he left the department, and what it was like to be trained there. And there's a couple of incidents I like to remind him of, and that is the gentleman that kept going through the red lights, and We'll start with that one.
Well, we're starting with the finish.
Okay.
Basically, I think I didn't know very much. I was quite young and I knew next to nothing about law or anything else, but I had the notion I knew they were looking for policemen, and apparently I thought it might be an interesting job, so I took it up. But the thing that started right off the bat that I couldn't fathom is after the short term of a little bit of introduction they gave us before they sent us out on the street. As soon as they sent us, each one of us that passed the course and went through was put with a man that had been on the force for some time. And I was put with a Paddy Hart, and he was a typical Irish policeman, just about ready to retire. And in all sincerity, he says, Jack, he says, the first thing you got to learn, you're on the job, keep your eyes open. If you see trouble, head the other way.
That would be inspirational.
You've got to be alert, but don't get involved in anything. Because no matter what you get involved in, you're going to be in trouble. There is no such thing as doing the right thing. Well, I couldn't fathom this. What the hell are you out there for? But it's true. You couldn't. No matter what you did, you were in trouble. Or what you didn't do, you were in trouble. If you picked on somebody, I wasn't into anything big. I was just a beat policeman. The odd time put me with a car riding with somebody, just relieving. But down on Skid Road, you could just keep your beat clean, that's all. Just kick the guy off your beat over onto the next guy's beat. That's all. The hell with it. The rest of it. There was nobody down there that mattered. It was the best beats in Vancouver. Everybody thought, oh, that's a hell of a dangerous... It was a choice beats because you didn't get in much trouble there. And these people, there was nobody down there that had any real pull, or they didn't know anybody that amounted to much. So if you kicked the bastard and got him off the goddamn beat, you weren't going to hear from him or anything about him. But you get up on Granville Street, where you got a few nightclubs and a few so-called important people. All right, if say there's a drunk. Oh, if you pick on him, hell, Christ, he's got friends. You'll hear about this. He's got friends in the police department. If you don't pick on him, there's a report goes in, that officer was there and he didn't do a thing about it. So you're in trouble either way. It doesn't matter. So you got to go back to Paddy Hart's way. If you see anything, get the hell out of there. That's the only way you could survive. He was right. Well, by this time, it didn't take long, and I was beginning to see the whole thing was... I didn't know all about the real deep secrets behind it. I didn't realize things were that bad. But I knew, as far as a policeman was concerned, there was just no sense in being there. Well, this episode of the guy going through the light, I was on a 4 to 12. No, I was on a graveyard shift because there was very little traffic, and I was on the corner of, I think it was Robson, just a block or two off of Granville. Not a goddamn, nothing open. Most everything was closed. And it was a rainy, miserable night. I'm standing on the corner. Just so happened that my call box was right on that corner. But I was just standing there, and all of a sudden I noticed, here come a big black, it wasn't a limousine, but it was a big black, beautiful looking automobile. It come drifting along very quietly. So, and I look at it and something about it, and I looked at the car and I looked up at the light and I could see, well, the light was going to change, and I said, I wonder what the hell is something about the way he was. And then the light turned amber. He's still drifting on. Then it turned red, and then he stepped on the gas. He drove right through the light. Now I'm standing right on. He knew I was standing there. I thought, you sucker, you did that on purpose just to annoy me. But it's too late. He's gone. Well, I'm standing there sort of mad at myself for letting him make a fool of me like that. And God, here he comes again. He'd gone around the block and he's coming again. Now he's purposely hanging back, waiting for the light. So I thought, you're not getting away this time. So like a goddamn fool, I steps out, put my hand up to stop him. Well, he just stepped on the gas and he came at me full bore. And I took a dive, and luckily how the hell I got by, but he went through the bloody light and he was. So I got on the goddamn phone. Text, I says, for God's sake, I says, send somebody out right away. I says, there's a guy playing games with me. He says, all right, Jack. He says, there's 2 cars right in the area. He says, just hang tough. Be somebody right away. Well, his downfall was he was coming back again for the 3rd go at it. But in the meantime, one car had come from one side, and the other car had come from the other side, and they blocked the bloody thing off right through. Well, here's me. I'm irate as hell, having thought I was going to get run over. I dives to grab the door, and I had him half dragged out by the time one of these guys had got there. Don't do that. Don't do that. Not in front of us. I was all set to hammer the guy. No, don't do that. Okay, well, I says, that sucker tried to kill me. And he says, it doesn't matter. He says, just don't do anything that we can see. He says, it's only going to cost you. You get in trouble. All right. And put him in the car, and you're going to take him into jail. And so lock him up. So then they delivered me back on the beat again. Oh, I don't think I'd been half an hour. And an unmarked car, detective car, pulled up. So, yours, so-and-so, yeah. Well, you arrested a man and put him in jail just a short while ago. And, yeah. Do you know who he is? No, I said, I don't know who the hell he is, and I don't care. Well, he says, you're going to care. He says, he's the son of so-and-so, whatever, at that time, apparently the biggest head bootlegger in Vancouver. He says, if you want to take a bit of advice, go back in, apologize, say you had made a mistake, and let him out. I says, I'm not going to do any such thing. He says, look, you do as you please, but we're only trying to help you. He's going to get out anyhow. But if you don't let him out, you're going to pay 10 times more than he ever thought of paying. So I says, no, I got a better idea. Give me a ride into the station. So I went in and promptly gave him all my hardware, gun, belt, the whole goddamn works. I just saved enough clothes to get myself home. So that was the end of my police career. And like I've often thought back, at that time, I figured, well, I just hadn't handled it right. I didn't know. But now when I think back on it, I don't know. If you wanted to be a policeman, I do believe that Paddy Hart was right. The only thing you could do to get by the way things were was just watch out for trouble and get the hell out of the road. Keep away from it. You had to be alert enough to stay the hell away from trouble.
Well, I'll tell you a story. This is going back probably 25 years. If you could tell me when they built the new police station, I could tell you when this happened. Because I was arrested one night and brought in the police station, and they wanted to do it. I wasn't giving any interviews without my lawyer. So they locked me up, and they actually treated me really good. They opened up a nice, fresh blanket, new pillow, new everything for the bunk. And personally, I was treated very good, but I saw some things going on in there that I didn't like at all. There was an old age pensioner that cashed his check, and I guess he was down in the palace, and he got a little bit drunk, and they picked him up for drunk, and they were manhandling this man. He was an old man, and I didn't think that was necessary. He wasn't offering any resistance or anything, and they were being brutal to him, and I yelled out and told them that stop it. And there was a girl there, but in the police station for something, and she seemed to be a little slow. She's a bit retarded in that. They were really treating her very rude, and she wasn't saying anything wrong to them or anything, and they were treating her not well at all. So anyhow, my lawyer, Jerry Bergen, he showed up, and he had sprung me out of there, and I remember they sent me a bill, a modest bill, and on the top of it he put, service to avoid residential embarrassment. I thought that was good. And in any event, I went to the newspaper. I said, to hell with this. This isn't Mexico. I went to the newspaper and I said, look, this is tough for me to do because they treated me really good, but they treat these other people terrible. And I think there's a few rogue cops in there that are pulling this bullshit off, and the other ones are going along with it. They want to rock the boat, but that's just not right. And it was a front page story in a local paper. Well, the first thing they did is deny everything. Oh, no, we didn't treat anybody bad. This is all malarkey. And I kept saying, yes, it's absolutely true. Seeing that you're so scientific, why don't we all put our hands on a polygraph and decide who's lying? Well, then all of a sudden their story changed, and it was, oh, yeah, well, that happens, but because we don't have any facility, a proper facility. If we had a better facility, these things wouldn't happen. And so they built the new jail, and there have been quite a few citizens in Imo said that your name should be on the corner of the plaque because you're the one that caused it. But I had to say something. You can't, even when you're being treated good in incarceration, you can't just sit down and let that happen as a citizen, because next thing you know, your son's in there, your daughter's in there, or somebody who doesn't have some influence, and then they're going to be ill-treated. And that's surely that isn't what 2 generations of Canadians died at war for our liberty, to put up with that bullshit.
Well, I don't know. The only thing I can look back on now, as far as I'm concerned, I will say this. I have, one was a very close friend, and the other one was a relative. Both of them were in the RCMP. And both of them, I would say, you'd be proud to I don't think either one of them men. It takes a very special kind of person to be a good policeman. In my estimation, there's basically 90% of policemen fall into one of 2 categories. Either they're so goddamn mean and miserable, or they're completely bloody useless. They may as well not be out there. The useless ones are probably the best. But neither of them they shouldn't be policemen.
Yeah.
And yet some policemen, somehow or other, no matter what the goddamn situation is, they can somehow or other manage to do a job and still be respected by the community or the people around them. Now, I think in some ways the RCMP had a sort of an advantage because both of these fellows I'm talking about, one was my brother-in-law. He's just passed away a short while ago. He'd always be posted in a small community. And in no time, everybody in that bloody community not only liked him, but they respected him. You didn't fool around with him, but they always liked him. Mm-hmm. And the other fella, he He's been gone for quite a while now, but he was back posted in the far north.
Well, you know, when you think about it, a policeman a lot of time will come upon a scene. He's called to a house or something, and people are fighting and they're hitting each other over the heads, and God knows what they're doing. And you've got to make an immediate, pretty much immediate assessment. And you don't know who caused it,
Yeah.
who's caused the trouble. I talked to a fellow, and I really felt sorry for him, and I offered to testify for him. He went to see this guy I know, this logger, and this logger was not a bad guy when he was sober. When he was drinking, he was a complete madman, and he was a mean bastard. So anyhow, he kept letting off these bear bangers, him and his son, down to South Wellington. So the neighbors, of course, this is 3 o'clock in the morning, they phone the police. A cop comes up and says, you guys got to cool it, you got to cool it. Oh yeah, we're going to cool it. So 10 minutes later, call again, they're shooting these bear bangers off, and they went up there and started giving him a talking to. Well, they shoved him into a ditch, and this fellow and his son got on top of him. They picked up a rock, and they're trying to smash his head in. So he managed to get his gun out and shot, and well, he got them both. Killed both of them. And to his surprise, and to everyone's surprise, I guess the people got shot as well. And there was a kerfuffle about it, and he got Bert King as a lawyer. And I phoned Bert and I said, look, I know that guy, his son. His son I feel bad about. The other guy, not so much. I said, I'm willing to come to court and testify. I've known this guy for 25 years, and when he's drinking, he's crazy. Like, he's a mean, mean person. In any event, I guess a lot of other people wanted to come forward, so the Crown did not press anything big deal. But the cops found out that I was willing to testify, and he came to see me and thank me. And he told me that the first thing that he did when he became the RCMP, one of the first calls was to have to go and see parents and tell them that 2 of their kids had been killed in a car crash. So that can't be fun.
No, I think there's very, very little that you're going to. It's a hell of a job, no matter how you look at it. Even though if everything was the way it's supposed to be, you're out there, you're not going to please anybody by what you're doing. No matter what you do, you're going to make somebody upset. You're much better off if you do something like becoming a fireman. You're doing a job too, but everybody thinks you're a bloody hero.
Yeah, but
the policeman,
I've never really thought a fireman
wow.
is too big of a hero, and I'm not knocking them, but most of them die when they're 55 or heart attack from sitting around the fire hall all day, and they're certainly well compensated. I remember getting kicked out of the Lotus restaurant one time because the guy there who owned the place, he was saying, "Oh, the Nanaimo boys, they should be getting the same thing as Vancouver. They should be getting less than Vancouver." So I said, "Well, why should they get paid the highest in the province? And why should they get paid?" "Oh, you anti-union bastard," and all the rest of it. You see, as soon as you say something like that, he must have had a son or a son-in-law in the fire department or something. But in any event, like nobody likes a cop unless they need one. That's the old story, right?
Well, this is the whole thing, and it would be wrong for me to pretend that I know too much, because obviously I still felt part of my problem was I didn't know enough. I didn't know how to handle it. But what a little I did know, I didn't handle it well. So
how else could you handle it?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know.
I wouldn't. If I were you, I wouldn't do any second guessing on that. I think you did the right thing. Anyhow, I think it was the Sun columnist Barry Mather. I think it was him. Wrote a little poem about the whole Mulligan thing. A very short poem, and it goes like this: "Off again, on again, gone again, Mulligan."
Well, I'll tell you one thing I did remember now. The only thing is I don't even remember his name. At that time, he was the assistant chief. And of course, after I'd thrown my gear in and come back as I was finished, I got a phone call and I was to go in, and I was going to have to have a bit of a face mulligan. He was taking me in. But the assistant chief was come along too. Well, Mulligan didn't really want to know, he didn't really want to ask me any questions. He started telling me all the goddamn things that I had done that was absolutely against all the bloody rules, coming in without making any proper and he just throwing it. So it ended up I was going to lose my holiday pay, which was coming. I was going to lose my court time, which was coming to me. I was going to lose this and that, and I was saying nothing nearly. And the assistant chief spoke up. He says, "I beg your pardon, sir." He says, "if I may interrupt." He says, "if I was 20 years younger and in this man's position, I would have done exactly the same thing as he did." And he says, "and I only have to praise him." So he says, giving him a bad time, in my estimation, isn't going to do anything other than annoy everybody, he says. So Mulligan, I don't know. I guess he paid for his insolence, but he really spoke up for me. So, and he'd been in the force a long time, and I don't know the men. A lot of the men spoke awfully highly of him. They said that he was the only real friend they had.
Well, that sounds very good, and I'm sure you're sincere in thinking that, but it sounds too much to me like good cop, bad cop.
Well, it could
They
be.
play that, eh?
Yeah.
That's what they play. In any event, you've told me a few stories, and the one thing I'd like you to tell on this thing is you've done so many things. You were in the Navy, you were in the police force, you're a welder, fabricator, you're a logger, you tried fishing. This gentleman, you're a logger named Bill Miller, and tell us a little bit about Bill Miller. You call him the Whistler, the whistling logger.
Yeah. Bill, when I was sent I was at that time thought that I might be interested in becoming a government scaler, and Mr. Byers, he was at that time the head BC government scaler, had an office in the Marine Building in Vancouver, and he was trying to coach me along, sending me out with the local Vancouver scalers, scaling logs in Vancouver on weekends and one thing and another. But he wanted me to go out. First he sent me to a sawmill. That was on my summer holidays, to see logs when they were cut open. You're learning to grade logs from what you see from the outside, but he says in order to see what you're seeing from the outside, you've got to open them up and see what the defects do, so you can grade it. And also make certain discounts. For so many board feet, you've knocked off so many board feet for this defect, that defect. Anyway, good. I went out. I hated the sawmill, but I put the summer months in. And I came back, and the next summer, now he wanted me to go out to the logging camp. So I'm on my way up to Elk River. And somehow or other coming from Vancouver over to Nanaimo to go up by bus. And anyway, coming over on the boat, I didn't know who he was at the time, but this tall guy with the iron gray hair, and he had a few drinks, but he was in a jolly mood. He come over and he says, "You by any chance going up to Elk River?" And I says, "Yeah, that's where I'm going." And he says, "What can I see your card you sent out?" At that time I was going up through Black's Logging Agency. So, he says, "Well," he says, you're going to be on my crew." He says, "They're sending you up as a wood splitter." Well, he says, "That's a good start," but he says, "It's the main thing you're going to understand when you come up," he says, "is that you're going to have to learn. I'm going to try and teach you. I'm going to try and make a logger out of you, but," he says, "you're going to have to listen to what you're told and learn to do it." Oh, that was fine. Well, it wasn't too long until I got on the rigging. And what really impressed me, we got on a skyline show. So you'd get sitting back, and you'd maybe hook up with the two chokers. You might get 2 or 3 logs in each choker, and you'd send it in, but somewhere down the goddamn road, it'd be probably a hang-up. Well, that the hook tender was going to handle that. Well, that was Bill Miller. He was the hook tender. Well, Jesus Christ, he'd try this, and he'd try that, and he'd try something else. And, of course, Skyline Show, that's going over that same route all the time, and half the time it's raining. That's nothing but a sea of mud. So he'd be covered with bloody mud, and finally he'd fly into a bloody rage. He'd always end up, he'd take his hat off and he'd throw it in, and he'd jump on the son of a bitch. And then he'd sit down. He'd quit swearing, and he would sit down, and he would start to whistle. Well, here we are, sitting there with your back in the weeds, and here's this beautiful whistle drifting up through the. That man could whistle like I never heard before. It was absolutely beautiful. And a few years later, traveling up the coast somewhere, I got talking to a guy that was heading up to a camp, and we got talking about different people you knew. I said, "Did you ever run into Bill Miller?" "Oh, yeah," he says, "that was Bill Miller." I said, "Did you ever hear him whistle?" He says, "You bet I heard him whistle." He says, "I was on the same crew with him the day that he got killed. And when we carried him out, he whistled pretty near the whole way."
Really? On a stretcher?
Yeah.
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 Elk Falls, that's the first place I worked. And I remember working up there, I was 16 years old. It was hot in the summertime like it is now. And the great big timber and big chokers, big choker bells. And then I remember the big fat truck drivers coming in there with the big off-highway trucks. And they always say to me, "Hey, young guy, would you take my hard hat and run down that creek and fill it full of cold water?" And I go all the way down the creek, picking up there. And then the next big 300-pound slob truck would come along. At least it was something to do. But it was dangerous. Holy moly. There was no training. There was absolutely no training.
Do you know, I remember, I think it was Clayton Bay. It was sitting beside the old steam pot. And there'd been an accident the day before, and they'd shut down the one side. And not the whole show, but they'd shut down the one side. However the hell that worked, I don't know. But anyway, we were talking about it, and somebody was a little bit browned off because they hadn't shut down the whole show. So Ed Dolby, he was our hook tender. He said, "Oh hell," he says, "you guys," he says, "you ever remember the goddamn day?" He says, "Well, they never shut down nothing." He says, "You killed a man." He says, "You dragged him in and you laid him there on the ground beside the donkey engine. And you took him in with him when you went in at night."
Yeah.
On the crummy.
Yep. That was very common.
I thought to myself, well, now that is the biggest bunch of bullshit I ever heard. Well, the only thing was, about a good 5 years later, I was out in the oil fields in Big Valley. And on the Trident drill rig, which was just about, I'd say about no more than 5 miles out of Big Valley, the nearest town of any size was Stettler, but it was about 30 miles. The day before Christmas, 2 roughnecks, they were running drill stem. They were down at the wellhead in the pit, and as the drill stem, it put a new section on a drill stem, and then there was like 2 big pipe wrenches, but one would just swung, it was held back by just a cable holding it back, and the other one was hooked to a cable going to the to the winch. So the two roughnecks down there, they were handling these, and they were suspended, these things. Well, anyway, what happened apparently was they yanked that thing up, give her a reef with the winch and yank it up tight. One wrench is holding it back and the other one tightening. Only these goddamn things are big. They weigh several hundred pounds apiece, eh? Well, anyway, the whole back, the one on the whole back, the line broke. And the goddamn thing spun real. The wrench coming around hit the one guy, and the guy hit the other guy and knocked him down. Well, supposedly the first guy was already dead, but the second guy wasn't. He got hit by his partner and got knocked down. But the bloody things were still spinning, and he tried to stand up. And it hit him and killed him. So here's the two of them dead. The head, what do they call him? The head
rig foreman.
The rig foreman. He drove to Stettler to make sure they were cleared by the law, but they never bothered to bring the men in or tell or let the men's wives know that their husbands had been killed until quitting time, until they came in.
Yeah. So they know better.
So that was really, well, gosh, I guess probably they did let men lay there beside the
Well,
donkey.
I'm going to introduce you in the next couple of weeks to Jack Stewart, who's 91 this year. He worked for my grandfather here logging in 1935. And he told me that they say the same thing. They didn't take anybody out at the end of the shift. But he told me that he's seen Chinese fallers killed. A limb broke off a tree and come down and killed one or two or whatever it was. And he said that they were different. When one of the Chinese got killed, the Chinese would take all their tools and put them in a certain place on the side of the road, and they'd all leave. And they wouldn't ask for the pay, and they would never come back. And of course, they'd send somebody up to Chinatown to get a new crew. But when they thought it was very like superstition. They were killed, you leave, you don't ask for your money, you don't come back.
No, there's some weird things. But I don't know, most of the as far as I was concerned, I guess it was a good I don't know. You were out in clean air. You were getting good food. A damn sight better than hanging around the city being a goddamn bum.
Yeah.
I had very little. I had no sympathy for him. I used to come in and visit a friend, stay with a friend there. Well, maybe I was wrong, but we'd come in and he'd start crying right away, you know. Oh, because I used to chum around. We worked the camps together for quite a bit. And when we come to town, we'd stay with his sister and her husband. And he'd moaning and groaning, and he'd hear you guys come in, and he says, you've only been out in camp for a few months, and you come in and you're spending money like it's going through. Here I am, I work 10 hours a bloody day, and I don't make enough bloody money to, well, who the hell's bloody fault is that?
That's right.
Eh?
That's right.
If you're stupid enough to do that, you deserve to bloody well.
I'm going to tell you a quick story. We got lots of time yet? No problem?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you. Me and a guy named Gerald Patrick Wienmeister Jr. His old man used to be a technical consignee in Nanaimo, but Wine and I were haywire. We were about 17 years old. We had a 51 Ford hardtop. Not much money, but we had what we called a Mexican credit card. You know what that is?
No.
That's a 5-gallon can of siphoning hose. So we had a case of Prem and a case of canned spaghetti and 2 gallons of wine, and we decided to go for adventure. We ended up and around Castlegar up there. But there was no work, and there was a lot of rain that spring, so the aero dams couldn't be started. They couldn't put the footings in. The water was too high. So we went working this, when I say haywire logging camp, you never anything like it. So we were in there with Chokerman, and we had this big thing of spaghetti, and that was that. And that's all we had to eat, and we eat that in the dark in the morning, and then we'd go work for this guy. I don't think we were going to get paid. And then one morning we woke up and we cooked some spaghetti. It was dark, and he put on the thing. Well, anyhow, it got daylight before he got picked up in there. and I thought maybe I'll have some more, and I opened the can to put some in the frying pan. The bloody stuff was crawling. So they say maggots are good protein. They must be. But that was pretty haywire. I've seen camps where there's a toilet, but it goes right underneath the trailer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. There's no plumbing, no nothing. Oh man, that's haywire.
Well, I don't know. You know, it's always the same thing. When you hear somebody tell us, it reminds you of something. You talk about when things are tough enough, sometimes they can bring back memories of, make you. I can remember at Nootka, one of the, well, he'd been there for years, little Scotty Welch. So he was talking about his bloody life, because nobody really knew Scotty before he'd come to Canada as a young man, and apparently he'd got somehow or other next to the fishing industry, and he'd worked hard and he'd worked his way up. Started out with an old boat and gradually worked until finally he says he was at Cayucit. In them days, the end of the run. There was hundreds of boats all tied up. He figured the nicest boat in the whole goddamn fleet, and he had a wonderful year. He had enough money, everything was paid for. And he'd apparently decided to get up in the middle of the bloody night and make himself a cup of coffee or some goddamn thing. Anyway, he had an old Primus Coleman stove.
Yep.
That goddamn thing blew up on him and blew gas all over him and all over the bloody boat. So,
hey, they don't have that on the Coleman advertising on TV. I don't know why. But.
So anyway, he dove overboard, but then he could see his whole boat was on fire, and he'd not only he'd gassed up, but he had two 45-gallon drums of gasoline on the deck as well for heading back to Vancouver in them days, everything. But luckily, his boat was right on the outside. It was tied, the boats were all tied together.
Cut her loose.
And he just threw his dinghy overboard, cut his bloody boat lines loose, and he's towing his boat away with the rowboat. And the goddamn, I guess one of the drums or one of the tanks blew up. Blew him right out of the bloody water. So he says, you know, the next thing I knew, here I am stretched out on a goddamn, on a float. And there's a bunch of guys standing around me. And he says, I looked down, and he says, just after all these years of work, what in the hell have I got left? Nothing but a burnt up pair of bloody old long johns. And he says, you know, I made up my mind that'll never happen to me again. Every time I get a few dollars, I drink the son of a bitch up.
Now, speaking of putting your dinghy, throwing your dinghy overboard, a friend of mine's got this yacht, right? There's two bathrooms and it's got a living room like this and everything on it. So we wanted to go to the Gulf Islands one time and just give me the gears. We went to school together, so that was fun. So in the morning I got up and I had to have a leak, and I thought, well, you're on a boat, you save water, right? Hang your dinghy overboard. So I did that, and he got all upset with me. Said, I belong to the yacht club, Somebody's liable to see that from the shore and report my boat to the yacht club. That was the last trip I went with him. I was at a lot.
I guess we've all put in a few years, and I've put in a few years, and I look back now, and what in the hell good did I do?
Well, I remember the first time I saw you, and I got to know you, and I was just about 15, and you used to have that welding mask, and you'd flip it up to talk, and you had, at that time, quite big eyebrows.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, and you were a tough-looking old young bugger then. You were a tough-looking guy. You were always polite and everything else congenial, but you were a scary-looking guy when you were younger.
I don't know about that.
I do.
Well, I was up at Clayton Bay, and that was a float camp. Everything was on floats. The bunkhouses, the whole goddamn deal. It was just... And, of course, you only seen a boat once every 10 days. So it gets pretty bored, and the guys are sitting around and playing poker at night and one thing and another. And we had this one guy there, I don't remember his name. But anyway, did you ever read the funny papers? alley-oop.
Oh yeah.
And Fuzi, his partner, he always rhymed everything.
Yes.
Well, this guy had picked up that habit. He always, whenever he spoke, he would try to make it into a rhyme. Well, they're playing poker and everybody is more or less sitting. Some guys reading, some guys playing golf. All of a sudden, boys, he says, I gotta leave you. He says, I'm going out and I hope you don't listen, because if you do, you'll hear me pissing. So a few minutes later, in he comes. You know, he says, it takes a man with a lot of pluck to go out in the dark and piss in the truck.
That was
That was, but you know, it didn't matter. Over a period of time, he always seemed to have some goddamn thing.
the new one.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you who could match him, I guess, is Gordy Barr.
Oh, he was a prince of a guy.
Wasn't he something?
Oh, he was.
You know, when he died, he phoned me, and he told me he had a third cancer operation. He said, the doctor told me that they can't put it together. There's not enough to sew together. So he said, he called me Cactus. So he says, okay, Cactus. So that's my last call. He told me he only got a week to live. Just like that, eh? And I remember going, after he phoned me, it was the end of the day, and I went in the shower, and I cried and cried and cried. And I thought, the shower was a good place to cry, right? Tears are washed away. But because, you know, he was so funny.
Oh,
right across the road here, we logged 160 acres for old Moore there, old Neely Moore. And he hauled 5 loads a day, and he'd come up there and load it with his little John Deere front end loader and on the truck. And he'd get out of the truck, he'd crawl out of the truck, and he'd be staggering, just laughing. And he'd tell you the story, eh? But he'd make up the story, but it was about someone you knew. He'd put somebody into that story. And he did that day after day, after week. Every load he'd come out with a joke about somebody, and it was he was the funniest guy, eh?
Oh, everybody used to love Gordy for.
Funny something?
He would just keep you in bloody stitches.
He used to his truck, you know, was like his wife, and he'd say to his truck, you don't break down to me this week, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll wax your hood or something. You know what I mean? To make you look good. But I'll tell you, did you know Frank Carano?
Not that I know the name.
Yeah,
but
old Italian faller, big, long-legged guy, and real skinny, and used to smoke a cigarette with a cigarette holder, you know, like like this. And he was a damn hard worker, really good guy. Booze. I went to his house one day, and I got his picture here somewhere, and he's got this big Italian nose. I said, I want to get you a picture, Frank. I said, just turn a bit. I want to get the angle there. And he said, oh, you want to take the big picture of the big Dago snaz, don't you? And I said, I guess so. But, yeah, we were up at Mud Bay, that area one time, logging, and he fell a cedar, and he went up to limit, and he had killed a cougar. It landed on a cougar there. Guess watching him. We always called the old cougar after that. But, you know, the hardest job I ever had was we went up to North Rendezvous Island, which is just below the Yucatan Rapids, about 40 miles north of Camp River. And we're logging the north of the North Rendezvous group. And we would get to work at, say, in September, we get to work at around 6 o'clock, 5:30, just breaking daylight. We had to come from Stewart Island by boat, 45 minutes by tug to get there, and beachcomb boat. We'd start there falling up there on the side hill, and we'd drag the timber down to the beach, and there's a little bit of a landing site there, and then we'd work till about 6 o'clock at night, and then we'd take 1 hour to get home. We'd have dinner there, and immediately go to bed, and go to sleep, and wake up around, we go to bed, say at 7:30, 8 o'clock, get up at midnight, go back to the island when there's high tide, no tide, low tide, and we'd set a boomstick, which we had already on the thing, set a boomstick out there, and 2 side sticks, and we lay cables down there, and I'd get on the loader, take those logs, and make bundles while the tide was out. Then put the line over, clevis, close it, do 6 bundles, 6 big bundles, put this back stick on, pull a swifter line on, and head back to the place. We get back about maybe 4 in the morning, go to bed for 1.5 hours, get up, quickly eat breakfast, and go back there. And then the tide was floating, and we had to take that section that was floating around the corner on a slack tide, because that tide really runs up there. And if you miss it, you're gone. You go down the Yucatan with it. But anyhow, We'd get it on the slack tide when nothing was moving, quickly move it around the corner, 15 minutes, push it into a stiff leg, tie it up, and do the same thing the next day. And we did that for 8 days to 12 days in a row until we had about 7 sections. And then once the Iron Mac, this big tugboat, hooked onto it, it was insured. You could go home. In fact, we were there till late in the year, and everybody thought we were going to get blown off the face of the earth because the wind's coming down from the butte. But we had no way of getting a barge in there when we wanted it. So we got about 20 big cedars. We lashed them together. We put the skidder on there, the loader on there, and we sucked put your choker around one end and hooked on the other end and used the winch to hold us down there. And then we got the little boat. We pulled ourselves down to Quadra Island, Cortez Island. Then we took the ferry over to Quadra, and then we ferry over to Cameroon when we got home. So we made our own barge to get home. That's pretty haywire, isn't it?
Oh, the world, yeah. No, it is amazing what some of the things that you look back on and how in the hell you had the guts enough to do some of these bloody
You know
things.
what? You know, I'll tell you the truth. It is the truth. You can't do what we did. The only reason we did it is we didn't know it couldn't be done. Do you know what I'm talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah. I remember one time Ronnie Robinson, the boom man up there, he says, you know, if a man falls in the water here in November, December, you're only good for 10 minutes and you'll be dead. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's bullshit. You know, I could jump in that water. No, bullshit. So anyhow, we were on the way back to camp for dinner. I jumped in that water. I'm sure I came right out as fast as I came in. Boy, I'll tell you, that is shockingly cold.
You want to tell you, that reminds me of a story for you. I went up to Ukilit. I don't know where the hell I'd been. Well, I knew bloody well if I go to Ukilit, I'd get some kind of a job, either with a fish plant or logging or some goddamn thing. Anyway, I got up there. I had absolutely no money. So I worked. It was coming on wintertime. And I got no rain clothes. I got no heavy underwear. I got bugger all. And they put me on this tongue logs off the water, loading barges. Well, the big deal there was, it's a good crew, but the big thing was, it was always hilarious when some poor bastard fell in.
Yeah.
and you know, you were tonguing logs off the wall in the pond. A lot of these logs wouldn't bear your weight. Yeah. So you're running like hell with a pair of tongues. You can't stop on a log or it would sink.
Yeah.
So you're running and throw the tongue and keep right on running to get, because you can bounce over them logs. Well, somehow or other, I managed to get by. I was the only one that hadn't fallen in. Oh, your turn's coming, Jack. Well, that's all right, but I might as well fall in. The son of a bitch was raining every day, and I'm soaking wet. I got no goddamn... And anyway, after the first payday, Jesus, I got to get some goddamn things. I didn't know whether to buy some long johns. Never mind trying to keep dry, at least keep warm. Yeah, I thought that's what I'd do. Instead of buying bone dries or some bloody thing, I'd buy long johns for the first month anyway. That's going to help. But it's getting right on to wintertime. So anyway, we came back, got on the crummy to ride back into town. I'd stopped in just long enough to stop into the hawk shop and bought myself a pair of what do you call them?
Bone dries?
No, the long john. What was the good one?
Stanfield.
Stanfield.
There you
You got a Stanfield long johns. I'm sitting there in the crummy riding back, and I'm reading this goddamn label. Even though you're cold and wet, you still feel warm and dry. Well, all right, I read this thing out loud, and I guess some of the guys listening there, they hear this. Anyway, next day, I'm out. I got my goddamn long johns on. I'm nice and warm. They took us with a little tugboat out and dropped us off at our bloody loading pond. Drop off on the big brow log. Well, that goddamn log Christ, it was 4 feet in diameter if it was an inch. And I don't know what in the name of hell happened to me, but somehow or other, I went to step back and I got my foot hung up and I lost my balance and I fell over backwards into the bloody water. But it was cold enough that there was a skim of ice on the...
Yeah.
No, I went down into the bloody water, and when I come up, hey, even though you're cold and wet, you still feel...
You heard that, eh? Well, you know, Jack, you're saying you fell through the ice. I can really relate to that because 43 years ago, and the reason I can remember it like that is my son's 43, he was just born. But on Cooper Island down by Shemana, so they call it Penellicut Island now, we were logging there, and there was a creek coming into the ocean, so there was a lot of fresh water there. And one morning there was a skiff of ice on there, and I went out walking on a boomstick. All I had to do was put two together, and I thought, well, somebody's got to do it. So I went out there. Well, the thing rolled on me, and I went down. I had cork boots on and all the heavy gear, and I just took the breath right out of me. It actually felt like somebody had kneed me in the groin. And so I thought, geez, am I going to drown here or what? So, you know, the cork boots are very heavy. So
Yeah.
I held on to the stick. I put my arm above it. But, of course, it kept rolling. And I thought, this is going to be a long trip back to the shore. The good thing that saved me is I got back to the shore, because I was by myself like an idiot. You got a truck had already left the landing. And I got up there, and we had an old bus that we had going there. We had a heater in there. We had just oil heat in there. And inside that bus was probably 110 degrees. So I was able to take my clothes off and turn blue back into pink again there for a while. But I know what it's like to fall through the ice. That really wakes you up.
No, I don't. Funny part of it is I don't remember suffering too much pain, but the thing was, these goddamn guys had I don't think I broke the surface of the water, and they were all, even though you're cold and wet, you still feel. Well, I thought myself, I'd never forgot that.
You know, we were logging at Valdez Island one year, and it was the coldest I've ever seen it. There was actually 2 feet of ice in the bay there. It was just like in Newfoundland. I remember my brother Eddie saying, you know, this reminds me of Newfoundland, for God's sake, you know. I don't think we should even go logging. I said, well, just be glad I'm not paying you like you come from Newfoundland. But, you know, you could, the ice, the window would freeze up, just immediately. And so I got this stuff you could spray on, try to get it out. So I couldn't see very good. I'm trying to get over there in the morning in the boat, looking out the window. While the wave come up, and it was so cold, it just would stick to the window like cement, eh? And one of them got me right in the face, this big wave, and I thought, the Old Spice commercial, yo ho, yo ho. Like you can just feel it in your sinuses. They just froze your face there. Man, that was cold. Yeah, I've been on some, you know, logging's been good to me. You know, the sad part, the only negative part of logging in my life is that, you know, knock on wood, it's just our 115th year, 1897. I think it's our 115th year that we've been in the business, logging sawmill business, and we never even had any action that could be considered serious until about 10 years ago. And we had a young guy showed up here and he wanted to work at the mill and learn logging, and he had no background at all. I thought maybe I could train a protege, you know, maybe I could train somebody. So I liked the kid because I said, oh, no, we don't need anybody. And he kept coming back, and even if he wasn't here, he'd put a resume under the door, and he'd hang it outside, put some paper on it so it wouldn't get wet, and you know, some wax paper or something. And he kept insisting, and I love a guy like that. Eh? You got something there. Young guy, 21, and he had kiosks and stuff over White Rock and wheeler dealer, and he'd buggered around with dope a bit. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to get into industry. So I got him over at the mill, and I tested him. I gave him a hard time and called him names and everything, and he hung in there pretty good. And then one Saturday he wanted to go out to the logging, and I said, no, I don't want you in the logging. I want you in the sawmill. Well, I want to learn. I want to know what it's about. So, okay, begrudgingly, I took him out there. I stayed with him for an hour and a half. I told him to just mark the logs. Don't have to get them all. Don't get near the skidder when it's coming in. Don't get near the truck when it's loading. Don't worry if you don't get them all done. Stay there till the 2 of the loads had gone out. And then I went back to the office here. It was a Saturday. And we were working Saturday because it was starting to rain and it was a fall, and we thought it might get slick in there, and next thing you know, won't be able to get trucks in there. Well, what happened was a truck started to skid a bit. And a guy was coming out of the bush with a turn of logs, and he saw the truck skidding a bit, trying to get traction to get out of the landing with a full load. and he came up behind the truck and tried to hit the truck from behind with it, push the load, which we've done a million times. What he didn't know is this 21-year-old guy was right on the bulkhead. He had crawled up there to mark the last few logs, even though I told him, spent an hour and a half of them, don't go up there, don't do that, don't ever do that, don't, you know, they don't have to be all marked. He went up there and the guy hit the log, and I've never seen this happen before, but I guess it's obviously happened this time. One of the logs sprung forward and crushed him right against the turret, you know, on the loader, right against that thing, crushed his chest right in, dead. Right. And I remember, I didn't even know this happened, and my niece came to see me, and she had some problems or whatever, so I said, well, let's just go for a drive out there, we'll talk about this and give you some advice I can. And we were on the way out to the logging site. I thought I'd just check it. And the ambulance races by us, and I thought, oh, gee, some poor buggers had a heart attack or something. And next thing you know, I see it pulling into where I got to go. And I thought, oh, Jesus, an ambulance going in there. What could have happened? The only thing I could think of happened is somebody was bucking in the coal deck pile on the log, rolled and broke their ankle or something. Couldn't be more serious than that. Well, it was. The ambulance quickly got the kid, took him away, and he was crushed to death. He was absolutely dead. Yeah. And the thing was, I had to go up to the hospital and identify the body. And it was, you know, he didn't have a mark on his face. He never had one mark on his face, but they had this fluid coming out of him, this jar, all this blood and stuff. And I remember crying like a baby. And not the undertaker, but the coroner, he was, you know, he said, you know, just take it easy and that. But it was terrible. His parents were on a holiday. They were away on a cruise ship. I had to take care of all the stuff. And when the parents got back, I went up to see them, and I said, if you don't want to see me, you don't want to talk to me, I understand that. Don't worry about it. He said, no, he loved working for you, and we want to see you. Well, when I went up there, he was okay, but that wife of his, she was just as white as a sheet. She was just all her was just drained out of her. And I found out a little while later that 7 years to the day they had lost a daughter in a car accident. 2 out of 3 kids. So that was very, very tragic. And I often think about him. And it just happened that I had a couple of pictures of him doing some silviculture work. So I got them framed and brought them up and give it to him. But that's terrible, you know. But other than that, we've never had any trouble. And it's such a dangerous business.
I've been around enough in the oil field. There's always somebody getting, and the funny part of it was it wasn't even, nobody thought much of it. Well, it just I couldn't believe it. I thought that the bush was dangerous. Christ, the oil at that time. I don't know what it's like now, but the different things will happen. I think the thing that I had over a period of years had different jobs where I was responsible for a few men.
Yeah.
And I think that's the worst thing, seeing a man get killed if it's nothing to do with you. But when you're responsible for that man, it's so goddamn hard when you start to think, son of a bitch, some way or other I failed to let that guy do, and it isn't necessarily true, but you can't help it.
I know. How do you think I felt? I'll tell you what, I went over that thing with that kid in my mind 100 times. And in fact, the compensation board, the guy was an older guy, sat down and bought me a coffee, and he said, you know, we could say something stupid like you should have had flashing red lights on or something. Yeah. He said, you know, sometimes things happen and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. He says, all we're going to do is write you a letter acknowledging what happened, and that's it. There's no suggestions. We have no suggestions. Because I thought, I'm so glad. Maybe it sounds selfish, maybe it is selfish, but I'm so glad. A, I didn't want to be there. B, I spent 2 hours with him and give him a job where, you know, you're pretty well foolproof. Well, it wasn't, you know.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I think the thing that sticks in my mind, I think that nothing happened, and yet somehow or other it scared me worse than anything I can ever remember doing. I was on Texade Island, and I'd been working for Pacific Lime Company for about 5 years, and eventually worked my way into where I was looking after the crushing and conveying system from the crushers, and once it got to the kilns, it was out of my hands. But I had the crusher and the conveyors and the screens, all that was my area. So I had, oh, 7 or 8 men, I guess, that was more or less on, and I was supposed to be the head guy there. Well, anyway, I worked there for about 5 years, and I decided I'd been long enough on the bloody island, wanted to get off the goddamn island, so I was all packed up, waiting to load my junk on the boat to get the hell out of there. And when the boat came in, he had been the manager there. He'd quit and gone elsewhere. Well, when he come off the goddamn boat, he said, "Jack," he says, "where are you going?" I said, I'm pulling out. No. He says, "I got a job for you." I said, "A job? What the hell? I don't need a job." I says, I've been here 5 years. I want to get the hell out of here." He says, "No." He says, "I've got the job of putting the iron mine in on down at it was on Gillis Bay."
Gillis Bay, yeah.
Yeah. So he was in charge of putting in that iron mine. And he says, "You're just the guy I want. I want you to look after the crushing and conveying." He says, "That's a large part of it." Well, what's so special? Well, he says, "I'll tell you what's special." He says, "We got 1 year to put that thing into operation." So he says, "That means I want you to work at least 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you can work more, all the power to you." He says, "In the meantime, you'll get the highest wage there is in the plant." And of course, I figured that out pretty quick. Yeah, well, of course, it was figuring it out in them days. With the union rate was, if you worked more than 12 hours, you went on to double time. Mm-hmm. If you worked more than 8 hours, you got on time and a half. And then as soon as you hit 12 hours, you went on to double time. Well, if you was on double time, and you didn't get a full 8 hours off, you stayed on double time. So that meant I'm going to be working on double time all the time because I'm greedy. I'm going to work. So, all right. So I was going along. I had different men working sort of for me, but I had one guy that worked with me all the time. He was just like my shadow. He was always with me. And I liked him, but he liked working with me because he could hardly speak English. And although he was a hell of a good worker, he had no trade of any kind. Well, I liked him. It didn't matter what you asked him to do, he'd do it. And he would work like hell, but he put him on his own, and he was kind of helpless. Yeah. So anyway, putting all this equipment in, one thing I soon found out, 90% of what we were doing was going to be no bloody good. I knew it was going to be no good. As I'd go up to the manager, I'd say, "Bill, that goddamn feeder that we're putting in there, it's not going to work." Well, he says, "No, probably won't." Well, I says, "What the hell's the use of it doing?" He says, "Look, Jack, just go back, follow the blueprint, and do what the blueprint says. Never mind whether it'll work or not." Well, this went on and went on, and I thought, Jesus Christ, this is stupid. So one day, he says, "Look, come on," he says, "I want you, we're going up to the bloody office," he said, "and have a talk." And there was him, he was the head engineer, and there was the mining boss, superintendent, and there was a construction boss, all from Utah. "We're going to have to bloody well get you to understand something. Look, quit coming with your goddamn beefs and stories of this ain't going to work and that ain't going to work. We know it ain't going to work, but we get paid to build it the way the blueprint says. Then we're going to rebuild it. We've already rebuilt one, and I forget where the hell that was.
Yeah.
So, and we know what we're going to have to do, but we're in the business of the construction is to make some money. We do what they want, and what they want is wrong. That's not our fault.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're
So
talking about.
anyway, come the time to test this bloody thing, we had some of it in. The crusher was in, the conveyor, the feeder was in. They dumped a load of rock in the goddamn feeder, and of course they buried the son of a bitch, and it wouldn't work. It was jammed up. All right, it had to be hand-picked out. Well, that was my poor helper's job. While I'm working on things, he's down there picking this goddamn rock out. And he'd got it out after several days. Some of the bigger stuff, he'd hook a line and we'd lift it out. But he'd got it out to where he was just down in the bottom cleaning up small stuff, cleaning it out. And I don't know whether one of the fellas that was something to do with putting in a goddamn conveyor or something, he come to me. He says, which one of these switches is for number one conveyor or whatever conveyor he wanted? Well, it shouldn't have been that way, but there was nothing marked.
No lockouts.
No lockouts, no bugger all, nothing marked to tell you which the switches were. It was all temporary. I says, it's the second switch from the end. So he goes over and he hits the second switch from the end, all right, but from the opposite end of what I was thinking. You've got a row of bloody switches, there's two ends. I said the second switch from the bloody end, but I'm thinking this end. He went over and he hit the second switch, and I heard the feeder start up. Well, I knew that this guy was in the feeder, and there's no way out. And great, huge, bloody steel blades, and they're all just coming forward, and he's encased like in a tunnel. There's no way out, no way of escaping. Well, as soon as I heard it, I could hear it start. It was just below me. And I hit the bloody switch, and I thought, and I had to go down. I thought, oh, Jesus. I just forced myself to go down. So what the hell am I going to see? Just a mangled mess. And I looked down, and I couldn't see him. He wasn't there. And I go, Christ, he wasn't there, nowhere. Oh, Jesus, I wonder where the hell he'd been. So I started to come out, and here he comes. Oh, Jack, he says, I hope you don't mad at me for going. I had to go for a piss.
God, that would just, I bet you lost 5 years off your
Oh,
life.
Jesus.
I'll tell you the thing that got me. I'll tell you the story. Around Departure Bay Road, there was an old fella, his name was Mr. Dye. And the Department of Highways in those days, when they had logs on the side of the road, they cleared logs on the side of the road, they just leave them there. And their thing was, if they're gone in the morning, well, we won't be concerned about it. They just want them gone, eh? Well, this is money from heaven. This is on Departure Bay Road. We just took them down to George Dorman's. So while we were there, this old man, very old man, he had about 5 or 6 acres there, and he had some good-sized timber. And he says, well, we want to buy some timber off me. I could use some cash. I said, sure. So anyhow, I was following the trees, bucking them. My brother Kenny would come along with his 450, pick them up, put them on his short log truck down the road to go. So anything, there's one tree was leaning, I can handle it, no problem. It was about this big, a fir tree. So I'm putting an undercut and a back cut, and I got a good wedge going there, and then the bloody wind come up. And holy moly. So I got another wedge and another thing, and I hit it with an axe, and I hit it with a hammer, and I thought, well, I didn't know how at that time, I was quite young, I was about 17 or 18, just exactly how to run that loader to push on it, You can't push and cut at the same time, that's for sure. So anyhow, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I'm sweating bullets, and the wind comes up, the wind comes up, the wind comes up. Finally, the wind cracked, and it broke off. It's this big, 130 feet long, and the house is about 40 feet away. That thing come down and hit and just knocked one of the fascia boards off the house.
Oh, jeez.
And I died 1,000 deaths.
Yeah.
Honest to God, those old people were in that house, eh? And the old guy comes out the house, and I thought, boy, is he going to rip me, and I deserve it. And he comes up and he goes, "Son, don't cut the trees down too close to the house. You're making my missus nervous."
Well, well, you know, I think most of the things, I don't think I ever did. Some of the most interesting things, or the stories I like to think I know, is other people and things they did. I had my first marriage, my first brother-in-law. I thought the world of that man. To me, he was quite a bloody hero. He was the head test pilot for Boeing aircraft during the war. But he was a man that everybody liked. You couldn't help but like George. They liked listening to him talk, and they liked his manner. He ended up after the war becoming the sales. He had all of Western Canada, and because he was an excellent pilot, they supplied him with a company plane and one thing and another. Anyway, he was telling me this goddamn story. He says that first thing after the war, he needed another job. Says one thing he thought he'd like to do is he still wanted to fly. He's going to fly for some mining outfits, fly freight up into the North Country. He'd never been up in the North Country. That's one thing he hadn't done. So anyway, he's telling me, I can't tell you exactly where he was, but he was up in some godforsaken place. So they would bring freight in to wherever they were, and there was several pilots there, and then they would ferry. But they actually never came out. Normally, they stayed there and dispatched freight around. So anyway, he says, when I got there, the weather was socked in, and there was no flying. And the boys are all sitting around playing poker and bullshitting. And he says, and nobody was really talking to me very much. And he says, I felt that there was one guy very friendly. He's just chattering to me. And he says, you know, without thinking, he says, I said to him, he says, you know, this is my first, I've been years in flying, but he says, this is my first time I ever been up in this part of the country. And he says, I'm very curious about whiteouts. What is a real whiteout? It's not fog. It's, what is it? And this guy, hey boys, he says, here's this fella we've been all waiting for him. He says, this big shot test pilot. He says, you know what he wants to know? He says, he wants to know what a whiteout is. He says, should I tell him? Yeah, tell him. And George says, God damn it. He says, I felt like a bloody fool. He says, I'm sitting there wishing to Christ I hadn't said nothing. He says to the guy, he says, well, listen. He says, do you know anything at all about airplanes? Well, yeah, he says, I think I know quite a bit about airplanes. Well, he says, when you're flying, did you ever notice if you looked out your right-hand window, look all out the end of your right-hand wing, that there's a little light there? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he says, now, did you ever turn your head and you look out the end of the left-hand wing? He said, you see, there's a little light on there? Yeah. Well, he says, do you know what they're for? Well, he says, they're marking lights. They're navigation lights. Navigation? What the hell are you talking about? He says, navigate. He said, don't you know where you're going? Do you need them bloody lights? Well, George said, no. What? He said, they're marker lights. No, he says, you've just asked a question. He says, what is a whiteout? Well, he says, whiteout is nothing. You can't see nothing. You look up, you can't see nothing. You look down, you can't see nothing. There's no fog, there's just nothing. But he says, if you look out to the right, he says, there's your little light there. And you look out to the left, and there's your lit. He says, you got her beat. Just keep her right in the middle.
That's it.
Just keep her
I'll
right
tell you
in the middle.
one more logging story. and it's kind of shows you how sick humor can be.
Yeah.
We were working at Yarrow, or on Chilliwack there, and we were up on,
Yeah.
the country's flat, and it goes up like a cow's face. So we're up on a mountain there, and this one guy was building road. He had a 977, he had a D7 with an integral arch on it, and he had a bucket, and so he's great for yarding and tree length and great for making roads. So one Friday night we were going to come home, and he decided he was fighting with his old lady. He didn't want to come home. He was going to build more road. And I said, come on, come home for God's sake. No, I got to wait, I'm going to put road. And I said, okay, but don't go near the bloody creek with that cat, because if you get any oil or any dirt in there, it all flows all down that country. You can see it for 100 miles from the air. So anyhow, I come back on Sunday night, ready to go on Monday, and I walked into the motel we were staying, and I looked at him, and he's got that hangdog look on his face, and I thought, what did you do? I got the cat stuff. Where? In the creek. Oh God. So anyhow, this thing was so stuck that that it was flowing. Water was flowing over the hood. So I thought, now how the hell are we going to get that D7 out of there? It's suction underneath. It's a whole bit. So there was a tree, a good sized tree, hung a block on a tree. I got the biggest excavator I could find in the valley, hooked a big heavy line around the winch, and I thought we had an FMC there. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a tank with logging equipment on it, and it can suck 40,000 pounds of line pull. So anyhow, I get that thing anchored down. My idea was to get the excavator, lift the rear end up, lift the winch up, the back of the machine, and then we had a block purchase on it, and pull it back a bit, put it down, lift it up again, pull it back a bit. We got to get that thing out of there. I don't know what it weighs, 35 tons, something like that. We got it out. We dragged it over a way, we dug a hole, and we drained it. And then the guy wanted to put a new main line on, so he pulled the main line out and had these big steel whiskers on it, right? And he put his face there like this to pull it, and it came out, and all these big untangled inch main line hit his face, and it just scratched him to hell. It was just bleeding out of the nose and all down his face and everything else, and I didn't have too much sympathy for him because he got stuck in that bloody thing after I told him not to. So the owner come along, this Dutchman with his daughter, and he says, "Is everything okay?" And the guy was sitting there, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "You got that thing stuck." And I said, "I didn't like that." I said, "I went there and gave him a goddamn good beating." And the guy walked out about a minute later, just pouring blood. The guy just looked at me. I'll never forget the look on his face. Eh?
Yeah,
I said, "No, he's okay. He doesn't even need stitches."
Wasn't it?
So anyhow, I want to thank you very, very much.
Well, I'm sorry if my big problem is that really I don't think I ever did anything that newsworthy, but my big failing is names and dates. I could tell you, well, I was working inside. You asked me when. Well, God damned if I can
The
tell
thing is, the good stories don't need names.
They don't need dates either.
No, that's right. That's right. They sure don't. So I want to thank you again for. I'm sure glad you come up a few weeks ago and we got reacquainted. And
yeah, well, I am very, very pleased too because it's helped me out terrifically. I managed to get out there puttering around, building useless things, and no, it's been a big help. It really, I've got to keep myself doing something, and you can't afford to be going and buying goddamn lumber all the time, especially when you're not building things that nobody wants.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say. They always say you got to believe in something, and that's what the drunk says. So I believe I'll have another drink. You see, but you've got more experience than any 50 other guys. And you're still having them.
Oh, I don't know. You get, like I say, it's mostly people I knew. It's not myself that I did anything, but I met a lot of people that were very interesting people. It's just like Scotty. I told you about Scotty and his boat, and he lost his boat while he was at Nootka for a good many years. And we got talking one day, like you will when you're having a few drinks, and Walter Sager was highliner on the coast in them years. So they said, Walter was he's heading north to head up. They still used to stop at Cayuga. All the boats that was the end of the run. They'd finish her off at Cayuga. So, I said to Scotty, I says, well, Walt, he's high man every year. And I says, how the hell? Do you know? He says, no bloody wonder he's high man every year. He says, I went one year. He says, he'll be up when he hits. He'll be looking for somebody that'll go north with him. He says, I went with him one year. He says, when you get up there, he says, in his boat, he says he could carry, I'd say, he's going to stay out until he's got a full load. Well, he says, Jesus Christ, first we're hitting fish, so he's not quitting. You're going to fish night and day. You couldn't stop to eat. You had to fish. Well, then he says, and the goddamn weather finally got bad, and he says, and finally he says, he comes to, well, you've been crying about wanting something to eat. He says, well, you down, make yourself something to eat. He says, you can't, goddamn, well, what are we going in? No, he says, we're going to weather the goddamn out. He says, we haven't got a load yet. We're staying here. We'll weather it out. So he says, I went down into the goddamn galley. He says, it must have been 3 days since I'd had a bite to eat. He says, and I'm cooking myself some bloody bacon and eggs. And he says, and the boat is rocking and pitching, but he says, I got them sons of bitches cooked, and I got them on a plate. But he says, and they're just like a goddamn fool. He says, I tried to put them on the table, and they slid off and turned upside down on the floor. And it's about an inch deep with fish scales and crap and blood that we'd been carrying around. Well, he says, you know, I'm not ashamed to tell you. I started to cry.
Oh, did he?
And he says, I got right down on my hands and knees and ate the sons of bitches.
Oh, God. I got a friend that sunk 2 boats by having too many fish on them. One, he was coming into Nitnat and from the water, and then he had a full load, and he came into the lake, and of course, you know, that doesn't float like it does in the salt water, and down they went. He put 2 boats down. But anyhow, once again, I want to thank you.
Well,
and I got to get you out for dinner, and I want to introduce you to my friend Jack Stewart, because you guys will have a ball.
well, I don't know, maybe he's got some tall tales that keep me going.
You'll have a good time.